everyone, welcome to my channel, HFY Beyond Terra. This channel is all about HFY and sci-fi stories. Now, let's start the story.
The interstellar hub known as the Wayfarer Spire drifted in the black, between constellations like a mountain carved from night. From a distance, it looked impossible, an entire metropolis, hanging in vacuum, layered with rings, docks, and glittering windows. Up close, it felt even larger. Cargo barges and diplomatic yachts threaded its approach lanes in orderly streams. Every day, ships arrived from worlds that humans had only recently learned to pronounce. Today, the traffic control beacons flashed a ceremonial sequence. Today, humanity would meet the Aurelian Dominion. Elias Kerr stood in the narrow mirror of his quarters and adjusted the collar of his formal uniform until it sat perfectly against his throat. The fabric was crisp and stiff, still unfamiliar compared to the practical gear he'd worn for most of his life. He'd spent a decade in the Marine Corps, where everything was simple: mission, team, survival. Then Earth had finally stepped far enough beyond its cradle to need a different kind of soldier, one trained to hold a room instead of a line. He exhaled slowly, watching his reflection do the same. Behind him, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Maren Holt leaned into the doorway, her posture casual, but her eyes sharp. She wore security black instead of diplomatic white, and even at rest her hand hovered near the sidearm sealed to her hip. "You done rehearsing your smile?" she asked. Elias tried one anyway. It came out tired. "If I practice too much, it stops looking like mine." Maren stepped fully inside. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," he said, straightening the rank bar that felt too clean, too new. "They're the Dominion. Old money, old power, old grudges. Which means they'll expect us to play the part." Maren replied, smile, bow. "Thank them for letting us breathe their air." Elias met her gaze. "That's not why we came." "Good." She nodded once. "Because I don't intend to let anyone treat us like we're a novelty act." They walked together into the corridor, where the station's interior changed by the meter. In the human sector, the walls were functional white panels, clean lights, signage into languages. Beyond it, the spire became a living museum of civilizations. Corridors widened into galleries where translucent organisms floated in slow spirals. There were beings who moved on 6 limbs and beings who moved without limbs at all. A tall figure made of braided metal passed them, humming softly, and the sound vibrated in Elias's teeth. Translation nodes embedded near every junction pulsed, with faint blue light, casting their interpretive shimmer across the air. He'd lived among aliens for months now, and still found himself pausing at small miracles. A scent that didn't belong to any plant on Earth. A laugh that sounded like wind through reeds. A gesture that meant respect on one world and threat on another. The reception hall, officially the Concord Chamber, was the spire's pride. It was cavernous enough to swallow a stadium. The ceiling rose into darkness, broken by hanging prisms that refracted starlight and station glow into drifting rainbows. Music spilled through the air, not from speakers, but from a cluster of instruments played by a species that used vibrating membranes instead of strings. Hundreds of delegates filled the room. Some wore jewels, some wore armor, some wore nothing at all. Conversations braided into a dense, constant sound until it became a single living hum. An older human with silver hair and a face lined by years of responsibility spotted Elias and moved toward him. Ambassador Rafik Tanaka's chief envoy on the spire looked as if he hadn't slept since the station was built. "They're here," Tanaka said without preamble. "The Dominion delegation docked 3 minutes ago." Elias nodded, heart tightening. "Cool leads." Tanaka's mouth twitched like the answer pained him. "Princess Seren Arl, 19. The sovereign is ill, so she's acting voice of the Dominion." Marin's eyebrows rose. "A teenager representing a civilization older than our recorded history. Don't underestimate her because of the number," Tanaka warned. "Dominion courts don't hand authority to children unless those children can survive it." Elias absorbed the warning, then glanced around the hall at the watching eyes. The curious postures. Earth was still the newcomer, a species with a few dozen ships and one battered homeworld trying to convince the galaxy it belonged at the table. "We need this," Tanaka added, quieter now. "Their protection, their trade routes, their technology, their influence." Elias's jaw tightened. "We need respect more." Tanaka sighed as if he'd heard that argument 1,000 times. "Just be careful, Elias." Before Elias could reply, the hum in the room thinned. Music faltered. Conversations died like a wave pulling back from shore. Every head turned toward the main entrance. The Aurelians arrived like a storm made elegant. They were taller than humans by half a head and moved with unnerving smoothness, as if gravity were a suggestion they'd mastered. Their skin carried a pale luminescence, not bright enough to cast light, but enough to make them seem slightly unreal. Their eyes were metallic, reflecting the whole in cold silver. They wore garments that didn't so much cover the body as shape. The air around it layers that shimmered, as if woven from the dust of comets. At their center walked Princess Seren. She was young, yes, but youth in her did not read as softness. It read as sharpened certainty. Her long hair, the color of polished moonstone, was braided back with a clasp shaped like a star. Her face was composed in the way statues were composed, beautiful, distant, and carved for worship rather than conversation. As she moved through the hall, delegates bowed or angled their bodies in the respectful postures their cultures required. Seren acknowledged them with small nods that might have been kindness, if not for the way her smile never warmed her eyes. Then she saw Elias. Her gaze caught him like a hook. Without changing pace, she veered toward him, and her entourage followed, as if tethered to her spine. The crowd parted, some out of courtesy, some out of fear, some out of hunger for spectacle. When she stopped in front of Elias, she did not look at Maren. She did not look at Tanaka. She looked only at Elias, and she looked him over the way a scholar might examine a crude tool. "So," her translator rendered, crisp and clear, "you are the human representative." Elias inclined his head. "Elias Kerr of Earth. It's an honor to meet you, Your Highness." He extended his hand, not a demand, just an offered custom. Saren stared at the hand as if it were an odd piece of debris floating between them. Then she laughed, not loud, not cruel in volume, cruel in precision. "How charming," she said, turning slightly so her attendants could share in her amusement. "They've learned manners, they've learned uniforms, they've learned the right noises." The hall froze. Elias felt the shift like temperature. Dropping, he held his hand out for a heartbeat longer, then withdrew it with deliberate calm and folded it behind his back. Saren stepped closer, and the faint glow of her skin made her seem carved from ice. "You carry the scent of conflict," she said, her nose barely wrinkling. "Your people have been among the stars for what? A blink, a rumor, while the Dominion has charted and governed for 10 millennia. Her eyes swept the room as if inviting the galaxy to witness the lesson. "You fight your own kin for land and flags. You scar your planet and call it growth. You arrive here with a single fragile world and expect to sit beside civilizations that have outlived empires you haven't even imagined." Maren shifted, one subtle step forward, fingers flexing near her holster. Elias didn't look at her, but he lifted one finger behind his back, a silent command. "Not here." Saren's voice sharpened, each word a blade polished to perfection. "If you wish to remain in our presence, understand your place. Gratitude is the first language of the lesser. Kneel to it for a moment." Elias could hear his own heartbeat. He could feel the weight of 100 gazes pressing on his spine. Curiosity, pity, disdain, hope. He could also feel something else: old memory. Barracks, training fields. The rule his first drill instructor had hammered into him: never let someone else decide what you are. Elias studied Saren's face. He didn't smile. He didn't scowl. He didn't make a speech. He simply gave a small, polite nod as if acknowledging that he had heard her, and turned on his heel. The sound of his footsteps echoed across the silent floor as he walked toward the exit. Maren fell in beside him. Tanaka hesitated, then followed, face pale. The human contingent moved as one, a line leaving the center of the room as if the room no longer mattered. Behind them, the doors sealed with a soft pneumatic sigh. For several seconds, no one spoke. Princess Saren stood motionless, mouth slightly open. Her performance had been designed for two outcomes: rage or submission. She had planned for both. She had not planned for absence. A scaled elder from a smaller delegation approached her, with the careful gait of someone used to navigating predators. He spoke in a low voice, and Saren's eyes flickered in irritation. "They're insignificant," she said, too quickly, as if reassuring herself. Newborns playing at civilization. But the words tasted wrong in her mouth, and she didn't understand why. In the corridor beyond the hall, Elias kept walking until the station noise swallowed the echo of the reception. Maren caught up fully. "That was either the bravest thing you've ever done," she murmured, "or the dumbest." Elias exhaled. "Possibly both." Tanaka jogged to keep pace, anger finally breaking through his diplomat's mask. "You realize what you've just done?" "I declined to be humiliated," Elias said evenly. "You embarrassed the Dominion," Tanaka snapped. "You embarrassed the council. You Earth has 50 ships. They have fleets that blot out suns. We don't survive by trading our spine for protection. Elias replied, if our first message to the galaxy is that we accept being treated as less than people, then we'll be treated that way forever. Tanaka looked as if he wanted to argue further, but he swallowed it and stalked away toward the comms offices. The battle, Elias knew, was about to begin, just not with weapons. Hours later, Elias sat at his desk in the quiet of the human sector, staring at reports he couldn't absorb. The scene replayed again and again. Saren's laugh, the silence, his own footsteps. Had he just torched humanity's best chance at survival? The door chime sounded. Enter, he called. Tanaka stormed in, face flushed. The council chambers are chaos, he said. The Dominion is demanding a formal apology. Half the station thinks you're suicidal. The other half thinks you're a hero. I need you to tell me which one you intended to be. Elias leaned back. Neither. I intended to be human. Tanaka stared at him, then sank into a chair as if the anger had exhausted him. You'd better hope the universe rewards principles. Before Elias could answer, the emergency alarms blared. Lights flashed crimson. A staccato tone shuddered through the walls. Moran was already at the door, hand on her weapon. Distress. Broadcast, she said. Elias snapped his screen open. A terrified voice crackled through the station feed. This is civilian transport pilgrim. Under attack. Pirates. Boarding in progress. Civilians. Aboard families' children. Please, anyone. Moran's eyes flicked to tactical overlays. We're closest. Elias's mind cleared. Instantly, like a storm blowing away fog. Get the Resolute spun up. Full alert. Moran blinked. After today, they didn't insult us, Elias said, already moving. They're just people. The Resolute Earth's newest corvette wasn't large, compared to the Dominion warships docked 3 bays down. It looked like a knife beside a broadsword, but it was fast, dense with hardened systems, and designed by a species that had spent centuries learning how to fight with limited resources. As the crew sprinted to stations, Tanaka's voice echoed in Elias's head. We need them more then. They need us. But out there, in the dark, a ship full of civilians needed whoever could reach them first. The Resolute launched from the spire like a fired round. Stars stretched into lines as the drive spooled. In the station's command gallery, Princess Saren watched the human ship's trajectory curve. Toward the distress coordinates, beside her, stood Elder Vale Thorin, one of the Dominion's older advisors, so old his skin glow had dimmed to a soft haze. They're responding, Vale said quietly. Saren's jaw tightened. They want attention. Perhaps, Vale allowed. Or perhaps they cannot ignore a cry for help. Saren didn't answer. She stared at the display until the icons resolved. The Pilgrim, cornered. 3 pirate vessels around it like wolves. The Resolute dropped into real space with a flash of blue-white light. On the bridge, Elias's tactical officer spoke fast. 3 hostile ships. 2 light cruisers, outdated. 1 cargo hauler with weapon graphs. Not military grade, but they outnumber us. They expect us to hesitate, Moran said over comms from the boarding bay. Her voice carried the bright edge of a fighter finally given permission to act. Most species won't close. Elias's eyes swept the formation. The pirates were clustered tight around the transport, focusing on their breach points. They weren't watching their flanks. They made a mistake. Elias murmured, "Let's educate them." He keyed the comms. "All pirate vessels. This is Earth Corvette Resolute. Disengage from the civilian transport. Power down your weapons and withdraw." A rough voice answered, amused. "Earth, the new ones? Go back to your nursery. This isn't your business." Elias didn't raise his voice. "Fire." The rail cannon punched once. A silent recoil that vibrated through the ship. A tungsten slug crossed the distance in a heartbeat and tore through the lead cruiser's engine. Block with surgical precision. The pirate ship's lights died. It drifted, suddenly dead weight. One hostile disabled. The tactical officer reported. The remaining pirates flared their weapons and turned on the Resolute. Plasma bolts blooming like angry suns. "Evasive," Elias ordered. The pilot threw the corvette into a tight spiral dive. Plasma scorched past, missing by meters. The Resolute was small enough to slip through firing solutions like a fish through nets. Electronic warfare filled their sensors with ghosts, Elias said. Countermeasures bloomed. False targets appeared across pirate scopes. Confusion rippled through their formation. "They're firing blind," the tactical officer said, almost surprised. "Good," Elias replied. "Put us between them." The Resolute slid into the gap between the two remaining pirate ships. They fired again. Their plasma bolts meant for the human ship slammed into each other. One pirate's shields collapsed in a flare. The other's weapon ray sparked and died. "Boarding team," Elias said. "Go." Morin's pod launched like a spear, hit the crippled pirate ship, and cut in. Humans spilled through the breach in armored silence. Most species in the galaxy prefer distance drones. Remote warfare, clean lines on a screen. Humans were the species that had learned, painfully, what it meant to be close enough to see the whites of eyes. Within minutes, Morin's voice returned. Ship secured. Prisoners contained. No casualties. The third pirate vessel tried to flee. Clip. Their engines, Elias said. Minimum force. Another rail shot. Another clean disable. The pirates drifted, weapons gone, momentum bleeding into nothing. The entire fight lasted less than 10 minutes. On the spire, Princess Saren watched the recordings and felt something sour twist behind her ribs. The humans had not annihilated their enemies. They had dismantled them, controlled them, taken risks personally rather than outsourcing courage to machines. They went inside. One Dominion officer murmured, unsettled. They fought face to face. Vale Thorin looked at Saren. "They could have ignored the distress after what you said. No one would have blamed them." Saren's hands tightened on the railing. "Why?" Vale's voice softened. "Because some species calculate, and some act." Saren didn't like the heat behind her eyes. It felt like weakness. It felt like something she hadn't permitted herself in years. When the Resolute returned, the rescued passengers were escorted to medical. The pirates were handed to station security. 12 Dominion nobles, among them an elder matriarch with an aura of authority, requested an audience with Elias at the docking bay. The matriarch approached slowly, her posture dignified despite exhaustion. When she reached Elias, she bowed deeply, a gesture that made nearby delegates gasp. "Human envoy," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "You saved our lives." Elias stepped forward instinctively, uncomfortable with reverence. "We did what anyone should." "No," she insisted. "You did what you did not have to do." Her silver eyes held his. "You were insulted. You were dismissed. Yet you came." Elias glanced aside, seeing other survivors' children clinging to parents, a medic carrying a small alien wrapped in foil blankets. There were families. He said simply, "That's enough." The matriarch reached up and touched his cheek with careful fingers. "Our princess called you beasts, but beasts do not do this." Elias didn't know what to say. He only bowed his head slightly, then guided her toward medical. That night, Princess Seren sat alone in her quarters, replaying the rescue footage, until the images blurred. Each time she watched, her certainty cracked a little more. The humans had walked away from her cruelty with their dignity intact, and then they had returned to save Dominion lives without asking for praise, payment, or apology. She stared at her reflection. Jewels glittered on her ceremonial garments, worth more than some colonies, and yet she felt poor. Power without character, she realized, was only a louder form of emptiness. When Vale Thorin appeared at her door to announce that her advisors wished to press for a human apology, Seren surprised both of them by saying, "Let them wait." Then, in a voice that barely held steady, she asked, "Vale, am I becoming what our enemies accuse us of being?" The elder studied her for a long moment. "You were drifting that way," he said at last. But the lost never asked the question. Seren swallowed hard. "I need to fix this." Vel's gaze softened. "Then do what is difficult, not what is traditional." No Aurelian royal had offered a personal apology to an inferior species in over 1,000 years. Seren knew exactly what her court would call it: weakness, betrayal, humiliation. But for the first time in her life, she understood that pride and strength were not the same thing. She removed her heavy regalia and dressed simply. She left her guards behind, and she walked alone to the human sector. The human sentries at the checkpoint stared as if the station itself had glitched. "Your Highness," one said cautiously, "can we help you?" "I need to speak with Eliasker," she replied. "Please." The guard hesitated, then nodded. "Wait here." When he returned, he motioned her forward. "He'll see you." Seren followed him into a plain conference room, no glittering prisms, no ceremonial banners, no displays of wealth, just a table, chairs, and clean light. Elias stood as she entered. Maren and Tanaka were with him, faces unreadable. Seren's throat tightened. "May I speak with him alone?" Maren's gaze bored into her like a warning made physical. Then she nodded and left with Tanaka. Closing the door behind them, silence stretched. Seren took a breath deep enough to hurt. "I came to apologize," she said, "not as a ruler to a representative, as one person to another. Elias didn't interrupt. He only watched, calm as still water. What I said in the reception was cruel, Saren continued, the words tasting like metal. It was wrong. I was raised to believe the Dominion's age and reach made us superior. I was taught to measure worth by conquest and longevity. Her hands trembled, and she hated. That they did. Today, I watched your people risk themselves for strangers, including for mine. And I realized I judged you by the wrong things. She looked down at her palms, as if she could find courage written there. I tried to make you small so I could feel large. Elias's voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp in its honesty. We didn't go to that transport because of you. Saren flinched. We went despite you. He finished. She nodded slowly, letting the truth land. Yes, she whispered, and that makes it worse. Because you did what was right even when I did not. She lifted her gaze. How did you walk away? How did you keep your dignity without striking back? Elias was silent long enough that Saren feared he would refuse her. Then he said, because I've seen bullies my whole life, and I've seen what happens when you let them write your story. He leaned forward slightly. I was angry. I wanted to answer your cruelty with cruelty, or to defend humanity like. It was a debate, but your opinion didn't define us. Our actions do. Saren felt heat gather behind her eyes again, and this time she didn't fight it. Can you forgive me? She asked, voice breaking. After what I said, Elias didn't hesitate. Yes, her breath caught. Just like that. Forgiveness isn't approval, he said. It's a choice not to carry poison. You owned what you did. You came here alone. That takes real courage. Saren wiped her face, ashamed and relieved all at once. I want to start again, she said. I want our people to meet as equals. Elias studied her for a moment. Then, finally, his expression softened. I'd like that, he said. But trust isn't a switch. It's built. I will build it, Saren replied. If you will teach me about your world, and let me teach you about mine without the masks. Elias stood. Saren rose too, and this time she extended her hand the way she'd seen humans do. Elias took it. The gesture was simple, but it felt like a star igniting in a dark room. In the weeks that followed, the station changed in subtle ways. Saren began visiting the human sector without ceremony, asking questions no Aurelian royal was supposed to ask. Elias answered about Earth's long history of mistakes and recoveries, about the wars humans regretted, and the peace they fought just as hard to build. He found, to his surprise, that beneath Saren's former arrogance was a mind like a blade, quick, curious, hungry for a better way to be. Negotiations began again different this time. Saren insisted on language that framed humanity not as a junior partner, but as a true ally. Her advisers bristled. Some threatened to recall her. In a formal council session, one noble shouted that she was lowering the Dominion to accommodate upstarts. Saren stood tall and answered, I am not lowering us. I am lifting us out of our own arrogance. She spoke of honor, of dignity, of the difference between fear and respect. She told them publicly that a civilization should be measured by how it treats those who cannot reward it. And, astonishingly, the chamber listened. Other species listened too. A reptilian ambassador whose people had endured dominion pressure for generations met Elias in private and said, "We have waited centuries to see someone refuse to grovel." Within days, more requests came. Quiet meetings, tentative offers. The galaxy had seen something new, a young species that would not beg, and an old empire forced to remember humility. A month later, in the same grand hall where Saren had tried to break him, Elias stood beside her at a signing table. The treaty shimmered above them in layered languages: mutual defense, shared exploration, cultural exchange, technology trade, governed by safeguards rather than dominance. The council chair, an ancient being whose name translated poorly into human mouths, declared, "Today we witness an alliance born not of conquest, but of mutual respect." Saren signed first. She looked at Elias as she did. "I nearly lost this alliance before it began," she said, voice carrying through the hall. "Prejudice made me cruel. The humans taught me that dignity cannot be demanded, it must be lived." Elias kept his speech shorter. "We came to the stars to belong," he said, "not by kneeling, and not by forcing anyone else to. We're honored to stand beside the Dominion and beside any who choose partnership over fear." Applause rose, and this time it wasn't polite. It was real. Later, away from the crowd, Saren found Elias on a balcony overlooking the station's distant docks and the slow spin of stars beyond. "A month ago," Elias said, "I thought I'd ruined everything by walking away." "You changed everything," Saren replied softly, "first by refusing to be diminished, then by showing mercy when it would have been easy to be spiteful." Elias watched a cargo ship drift into its berth like a whale returning to water. "We were lucky," he said. Saren smiled, no longer cold, no longer practiced. "I had a good teacher." They stood in silence long enough for the station to feel like it was holding its breath. "What happens next?" she asked. "I go home," Elias said. "Earth. I miss rain, trees, the sound of the ocean when it's angry and honest." Saren's expression flickered with something like disappointment. "And the alliance, it won't depend on me." Elias replied, "It shouldn't. You'll carry it forward, and you'll teach your court what you learned the hard way." Saren looked out at the stars. "One day, I may inherit the Dominion," she said. "I want it to be different." "It can be," Elias said, "if you keep choosing character over theater." Years later, Elias Kerr sat in an office at the Interstellar Relations Academy on Earth, watching students from a dozen species cross the campus green together. The air smelled like wet soil after a storm, a sound he'd never known he could miss so fiercely. His desk chimed an incoming message. A hologram bloomed above the surface, resolving into a familiar face, older now, steadier, carrying the quiet weight of leadership. "Hello, my friend," said Empress Saren Arl. Elias smiled. She reported reforms, new accords, new protections for weaker worlds, a slow dismantling of old Dominion arrogance. She spoke of how difficult it was, and how worth it. Before the connection ended, she said, "I still remember the day you walked away from me." Elias's smile softened. So do I was the day I learned strength isn't forcing others to bow. Seren said, it's standing upright yourself and giving others room to stand beside you. When the hologram faded, Elias leaned back and listened to the rain begin tapping against the window. Sometimes, he thought, the bravest act wasn't winning a fight. Sometimes it was refusing to fight on someone else's terms. And sometimes, walking away wasn't the end of a conversation. It was the first step toward a better one.